The 2026 Formula One season has only had one race. Just one. And yet the paddock is already on edge. Because after the Australian Grand Prix, the FIA has begun looking deeper into something inside the Mercedes engine. This comes just hours after Mercedes delivered a dominant 1-2 finish in Melbourne. George Russell won the race. Kimi Antonelli finished second. A perfect start to the season. But the numbers coming out of that race have shocked several teams across the grid. Acceleration data that looks unusually strong. Energy deployment patterns that engineers did not expect to see. And performance bursts that some analysts believe could be worth nearly 30 horsepower in certain moments of the lap. In Formula One, 30 horsepower is massive. That is the difference between fighting for pole position and fighting just to stay in the top 10. Ferrari has already admitted they were nowhere near the Mercedes pace in Australia. Red Bull finished more than 50 seconds behind the leaders. And now rival engineers are asking one question that could define the entire season. Did Mercedes simply build the best engine of the new era? Or did they discover something hidden deep inside the 2026 regulations? Because if the FIA investigation confirms that Mercedes has found a clever loophole in the new power unit rules, the performance we saw in Melbourne might only be the beginning. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why the data from the Australian Grand Prix has created huge tension inside the entire Formula One paddock. Before we break down the shocking engine data that triggered this investigation, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because this story could become the biggest technical controversy of the 2026 season. At first, the Australian Grand Prix looked like the perfect beginning for Mercedes. A flawless weekend. Pole position on Saturday. A dominant race on Sunday. And a powerful 1-2 finish with George Russell in first place and Kimi Antonelli right behind him. For a team entering a completely new regulation era, it was exactly the start they needed. But when the lights went out in Melbourne, the race did not immediately look easy for Mercedes. Both drivers actually struggled at the start. Charles Leclerc reacted faster and managed to take the lead into the first corner. For several laps, the Ferrari looked extremely competitive. Russell and Leclerc began exchanging positions in an intense early battle. Every time Russell activated the new overtake mode, the Mercedes suddenly surged forward down the straights. The acceleration looked very strong. But every attack came with a cost. Because under the new 2026 hybrid rules, deploying that extra power quickly drains the battery. And that created a fascinating rhythm in the opening laps. Russell would attack. Leclerc would counterattack. Energy levels would drop. Then the cycle would repeat again. It was the first real demonstration of how the new energy systems are changing racing in Formula One. But hidden inside that early battle was something that engineers noticed almost immediately. The acceleration of the Mercedes looked unusually powerful when the hybrid system released electrical energy. Not just competitive. Stronger than expected. At that moment, it still looked like nothing more than a very efficient power unit. But the race soon reached the moment that changed everything. A virtual safety car was triggered when a Red Bull stopped on track with a mechanical issue. And in that exact moment, Mercedes made the decision that defined the race. Both Russell and Antonelli were called into the pit lane at the same time. A perfectly executed double pit stop under the virtual safety car. That single move completely changed the race strategy. While Ferrari stayed out on track, Mercedes switched to fresh tires while losing very little time. When the race restarted, Russell suddenly had clean air ahead of him. And from that point forward, the pace of the Mercedes became impossible to ignore. Lap after lap, Russell began controlling the race from the front. He was not pushing aggressively. He did not need to. The car looked stable, balanced, efficient with tire management and energy deployment. Behind him, Antonelli began climbing back through the field after his poor start. Within a few laps, the two Mercedes cars were once again running first and second. From there, the race was effectively under control. Russell managed the pace perfectly and crossed the finish line in first place. Antonelli secured second, completing the Mercedes 1-2. For the team, it looked like the dream start to the new era of Formula One. But while the celebrations were happening in the Mercedes garage, something very different was happening in the garages of their rivals. Because engineers were already looking at the data from the race. Every acceleration zone. Every deployment of electrical energy. Every moment where the Mercedes seemed to gain time. And what they started seeing in that data is exactly what triggered the growing tension that now surrounds the Mercedes power unit. Because once those numbers were compared with the data from Ferrari and Red Bull, one question began spreading quietly across the paddock. How is the Mercedes engine producing acceleration like that under the new regulations? And the next block of this story reveals the specific numbers that have now drawn the attention of the FIA. But the real reason this story is now gaining attention across the paddock has nothing to do with the podium celebration. It has everything to do with the numbers hidden inside the race data from Melbourne. Because once the Grand Prix ended, every team began analyzing the telemetry from the race. That is normal in Formula One. Engineers study every lap, every sector, every acceleration zone. But this time, something unusual appeared in the data from the Mercedes. Not in the corners. Not in tire wear. In the acceleration phases. Specifically, the moments when the hybrid system released electrical energy to support the combustion engine. Those short bursts of power coming out of slow corners. When engineers compared those acceleration curves with the data from Ferrari and Red Bull, the difference became noticeable. The Mercedes appeared to deliver stronger bursts of power during those moments. Not constantly, but in very precise phases of the lap. That detail may sound small, but in Formula One it can make a huge difference. Street circuits like Albert Park are full of slow corners followed by short acceleration zones. If a car can deploy energy more efficiently in those moments, it can gain tenths of a second across the lap. And that is exactly what the Mercedes seemed to be doing. Several analysts inside the paddock believe the advantage could come from the way Mercedes manages the interaction between the combustion engine and the electrical motor. Modern Formula One power units are controlled by extremely complex software. That software decides when energy is recovered during braking. It decides when energy is released during acceleration. And it constantly balances battery levels, power output, and efficiency throughout the lap. If one team finds a smarter way to manage that system, the gains can be enormous. Especially under the new 2026 regulations. These rules significantly increase the importance of electrical energy in overall performance. Which means the teams that control energy deployment best will often control the race pace. Some analysts now believe the Mercedes power unit may be capable of releasing energy in shorter, more aggressive bursts than its rivals. Not necessarily for the entire straight, but for those crucial moments when the driver exits a corner and needs immediate acceleration. That kind of advantage would perfectly explain what we saw in Melbourne. Russell's car looked extremely strong when exiting slow corners. The acceleration was smooth, powerful, and very consistent throughout the race. And those small advantages allowed him to control the pace once he reached the front. Of course, this does not automatically mean Mercedes has done anything illegal. Formula One has always been a sport of clever interpretations. Many of the greatest innovations in the history of the sport started exactly like this. One team finds a smarter way to interpret the regulations. The others eventually catch up. Or the FIA decides to clarify the rules. Right now, the governing body is simply trying to understand exactly how Mercedes achieved this level of performance. Because if the advantage comes from a new interpretation of the energy deployment rules, it could give Mercedes a major head start in the 2026 championship. And that possibility is exactly why tension inside the paddock is growing so quickly. Because if the data from Australia really reveals a hidden advantage inside the Mercedes power unit, then the rest of the grid may already be playing catch-up after only one race. And this is the moment when the situation starts to become uncomfortable for the rest of the grid. Because when the data from Melbourne was compared across different teams, a pattern slowly began to appear. Mercedes was not just fast in one sector. The W17 was competitive almost everywhere. Strong in qualifying. Stable in long race stints. And extremely efficient in how it delivered power during acceleration. That combination is very rare at the beginning of a new regulation era. Usually, the first races of a new Formula One cycle are chaotic. Cars behave unpredictably. Teams struggle to understand the balance between power, energy deployment, and tire management. But the Mercedes looked calm. Controlled. Almost as if the team had already solved the puzzle before the season even began. George Russell's race in Australia is a perfect example of that control. After the perfectly timed double pit stop under the virtual safety car, he moved into clean air and began managing the race from the front. He was not pushing aggressively. He did not need to. The car had the pace to maintain a stable advantage over the Ferrari behind him. Behind Russell, Kimi Antonelli delivered an equally impressive recovery drive. After a difficult start that dropped him down the order, he fought his way back through the field and secured second place. That result completed a perfect 1-2 finish for Mercedes in the very first race of the season. For the team, it confirmed that the W17 is currently the most complete package on the grid. But for their rivals, it raised a very uncomfortable possibility. Because if Mercedes truly has discovered a smarter way to manage energy deployment within the rules, the rest of the field could be facing a serious disadvantage. Energy management has become one of the most critical elements of performance in the 2026 regulations. Electrical deployment now represents a much larger share of the total power output of the car, which means the teams that control that energy most efficiently can gain significant advantages during acceleration. Some analysts believe the Mercedes power unit could have an advantage of around 30 horsepower in certain phases of the lap. That number is enormous in modern Formula One. Even a gain of 10 horsepower can make a visible difference on track. 30 horsepower can completely transform the competitive order. Ferrari has already admitted that the gap to Mercedes is bigger than expected. Charles Leclerc said after qualifying that Ferrari was nowhere near the pace of the Mercedes during the weekend in Australia. Red Bull is also trying to understand where the missing performance is coming from. Max Verstappen finished 6th in the race, more than 50 seconds behind the leading Mercedes. For a team that dominated previous seasons, that result was a clear warning. And that is why the FIA investigation now carries so much importance. Because if the governing body confirms that Mercedes has discovered a completely legal but extremely effective interpretation of the energy deployment rules, other teams may need several races, or even months, to catch up. But if the FIA decides that the system pushes the regulations too far, technical directives could appear very quickly. And those directives could force teams to modify how their engines operate. Which means the dominant performance we saw in Melbourne might only be the beginning of a much larger story. Because the real question now spreading across the paddock is simple. Did Mercedes just build the best engine of the new era? Or did they discover a hidden advantage inside the rules that nobody else has fully understood yet?